The champagne glass slipped from my daughter-in-law's hand the moment her mother hit the floor. That's how it began. Helen, Jessica's mother, was convulsing on the marble tiles of my kitchen, foam collecting at her lips, her eyes wide with terror. Guests screamed. Chairs scraped back. The bartender dropped a bottle. But all I could think, as I knelt with everyone else, was, that wasn't supposed to happen to her. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Because this is the story of how my own family tried to poison me at my retirement party. And how, at 70 years old, I proved that age does not mean weakness. Just 2 hours earlier, the same room had been filled with laughter. Crystal glasses clinked. Old colleagues congratulated me on selling my consulting firm for $23 million, and my son Michael toasted my new chapter. It should have been the happiest evening of my life. Michael had insisted on hosting. "Mom, you deserve this," he'd said. His brown eyes soft, persuasive. "Jessica will handle everything. You just relax." Jessica, the woman who complained about loading a dishwasher, was suddenly arranging flowers, polishing silver, and fluttering around like Martha Stewart herself. "I should have known," she gushed at me. "Nothing's too good for you, Sarah," squeezing my arm with manicured nails that probably cost more than most people's groceries. The party sparkled. 30 guests. Champagne flowing. Laughter echoing against the vaulted ceilings. I let myself believe, for a fleeting moment, that my sacrifices had been worth it. After my husband died 15 years ago, I had built that company from nothing, working through grief and exhaustion, just to make sure Michael had opportunities. I had written the down payment check for their big house in Westfield, paid private school tuition for Emma, and quietly covered their tight months, more times than I could count. $200,000 in quiet gifts, never loans. I thought generosity bought loyalty, but generosity had only fed hunger. I saw it in Jessica's eyes that night. Nervous, darting, calculating, and then I saw her hand dip into her purse. A small vial, glinting under the chandelier. My blood froze as she poured the liquid into a single glass, the one with the tiny chip on its rim. My glass. A sensible woman might have screamed, called the police, knocked it from her hand. But I had spent decades surviving boardrooms full of men who wanted me gone. Sometimes the best way to catch a snake is to let it think it has cornered you. So when Jessica brought me the doctored champagne, her smile syrupy sweet, I accepted it. "Sarah, you look tired. Have some champagne, you've earned it." I thanked her warmly. And when her attention drifted to a neighbor, admiring her new tennis bracelet, I switched glasses, setting mine near Helen's purse. Helen, scattered as always, reached for it moments later. She even complimented the interesting flavor. 5 minutes later, she collapsed, writhing on my kitchen floor. Jessica screamed like a grieving daughter. Almost convincing. Almost, but not to me. Because I had seen everything. And I knew that glass had been meant for me. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. I followed the paramedics as they wheeled Helen through the emergency entrance. Her face pale, her body twitching with aftershocks of the poison that wasn't meant for her. Nurses rushed, monitors beeped, and within minutes, she disappeared behind a curtain, leaving me standing in a fluorescent hallway with my son and his wife. Jessica's mascara had smeared into raccoon eyes, but I knew the difference between genuine grief and performance. She clutched Michael's arm, sobbing, "I don't understand. She was fine 1 minute, and then she just collapsed." Her voice cracked in all the right places, as if she'd rehearsed it. Michael's face, though, was harder to read. Pale, rigid, but his eyes gave him away. I caught the flicker, the brief sideways glance at his wife, a look that lasted barely half a second. But 32 years of motherhood had taught me how to read him, and in that glance, I saw panic not just for Helen, but for their unraveling plan. The doctor appeared, his voice low but steady. Acute poisoning, he said. Plant alkaloids. Cause unknown. Specific enough to tell me Jessica had done her homework, vague enough to keep the others in the dark. I watched Jessica pace the waiting room, her designer heels clicking like a metronome of guilt. She wrung her hands, muttering about bad food, contaminated glasses, maybe a reaction to medication. The lies flowed as easily as champagne had just hours before. "Mom," Michael said gently, sitting beside me, his hand brushing mine. "You don't need to stay. This isn't your responsibility. Jessica and I can handle things here. You've been through enough tonight." How thoughtful, how carefully scripted. They wanted me home, away from doctors, away from questions. But I smiled and shook my head. Helen is practically family. I'll wait. His jaw tightened, the way it always did when he knew I wouldn't bend. As the night dragged on, I thought back to all the help I had given them. The down payment on the house, the tuition, the monthly checks when Michael's architectural firm hit another slow quarter. Even the jewelry Jessica flaunted came, indirectly, from me. Nearly $200,000, and still it wasn't enough. I had called them gifts, investments in their happiness. But maybe they had seen them as advance payments on an inheritance they were tired of waiting for. And now that I'd sold my company for $23 million, waiting had become unbearable. Jessica's wails filled the waiting room again. I watched her collapse into a chair, burying her face in trembling hands. To everyone else, she looked like a distraught daughter. To me, she looked like a cornered animal. That's when it struck me. My greatest danger wasn't illness, or strangers, or age. My greatest danger sat across from me in a Chanel dress, clutching a manila purse, rehearsing her next move. And Michael, my son, my flesh and blood, was either too weak to stop her, or already part of the plan. The morning after Helen's collapse, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Michael holding a white bakery box, Jessica at his side with that smile she wore when she thought she had the upper hand. "Thought you could use breakfast," Michael said, kissing my cheek as though nothing had happened. He set out croissants and danishes like a dutiful son. But when we sat down, his eyes sharpened. "Mom, you can't keep living like this alone, with all that money to manage. Yesterday proved it." Proved what exactly?" I asked, sipping my coffee. Jessica leaned forward, her voice syrupy. "That you need care, Sarah. You've worked so hard. It's time to let others protect you. We've already researched options. There's a wonderful community, Sunset Manor. It's more like a resort, really. Golf, spa, medical staff on site. Peace of mind." She slid a glossy brochure across the table. On the cover, smiling seniors in pastel sweaters, water aerobics, bridge games. It looked idyllic until I read the fine print. An entrance fee of $400,000, plus financial disclosures requiring full access to my accounts. I turned a page, pretending interest. "And who would handle my finances while I'm there?" Michael's answer came quickly. Too quickly. "I would. It's standard procedure. The facility requires a power of attorney, so they can coordinate payments and medical decisions. Nothing unusual." I studied him. My son, the boy who once brought me dandelions from the yard, now speaking of my life as though it were an account ledger. Jessica's hand rested on his arm, squeezing reassurance, but her eyes never left me. "This seems broad," I said, flipping through the forms Michael had produced. The so-called standard power of attorney was sweeping, giving him immediate control over every asset, every investment, every decision. "Mom, it's just a precaution," Michael insisted. Yesterday showed how fragile life can be. If something had happened to you, no one would have known your wishes. We only want what's best. Jessica chimed in. We'd visit all the time. You'd never feel alone. And you'd be safe. Safe. The word tasted like poison. I smiled faintly, sliding the papers back toward them. It's a big decision. I'll need to think about it. Jessica's smile tightened, her eyes flashing irritation before she quickly masked it. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair the way he did as a teenager when I refused him a new toy. As they left, I lingered at the doorway, the brochure still on my table, the photo of cheerful seniors staring up at me. Sunset Manor was never meant to be a sanctuary. It was a cage, and once inside, I would never leave, with my freedom or my fortune intact. They thought they had me cornered, but they'd forgotten one thing. I'd spent 45 years outsmarting men twice as ruthless as them, and I wasn't about to lose to my own family. David Hartwell's office smelled of leather and old money, a place where secrets were meant to be locked away in mahogany drawers. He'd been my attorney for 20 years, the kind of man who wore precision like a second skin. That morning, as the city buzzed below his 15th floor window, I sat across from him with my hands folded, telling him everything. The party, the vial, the switch, Helen convulsing on my kitchen floor, Michael and Jessica pushing Sunset Manor, and the power of attorney. I spoke calmly, but David watched me the way a surgeon watches a patient describing chest pains alert, calculating the hidden danger. You're certain about what you saw? He asked finally. As certain as I am about sitting here, I replied. He tapped his pen against his notebook. Then understand this. Proving intent will be difficult. Jessica could claim she was adding something harmless, a supplement, a flavoring. Without testing that champagne, it's circumstantial. Then let's test it. He nodded slowly. We can. But even with evidence of poison, she might claim it was meant for someone else. Her mother, perhaps. Insurance fraud, instead of matricide. I hadn't considered that angle, but he was right. Jessica had left herself an exit ramp. David leaned forward, lowering his voice. Sarah, poisoning was just plan A. If they're willing to kill you for money, they're also willing to destroy you in court. The nursing home suggestion? That wasn't kindness. That was positioning. Once you're institutionalized, a sympathetic doctor say, Steinberg could declare you incompetent. And if you're deemed incapable of managing your affairs, they control everything. I finished, my stomach tightening. Exactly. Guardianship means they wouldn't need your death to own your fortune. Just your silence. He slid a thick folder across the desk. First step. Establish your competency now. I'll arrange a full evaluation with a geriatric psychiatrist I trust. Get it on record. Second, restructure your estate. Trusts, directives, triggers that make it nearly impossible for anyone to challenge your wishes. I opened the folder. Legal language stared back at me like a foreign alphabet. But I understood enough. Walls, layers, defenses, a fortress in paper, and ink. There's one more thing, David added. Security. Cameras, sensors, panic button. If they tried once, they'll try again more carefully. I thought of Michael's gentle voice at the hospital, urging me to stay home, to let them handle things. How easy it would have been to slip something into my tea, to write off my death as age or grief. I'll do it, I said firmly. David smiled. Not warmly, but with approval, the way a chess player smiles when an opponent finally starts playing the real game. That evening, 3 technicians arrived at my house in unmarked vans. By nightfall, cameras watched every corner, red lights blinking like watchful eyes. I told my neighbors it was for package theft, but I knew better. This wasn't about packages. This was about survival. And for the first time since the party, I felt the odds shifting back into my hands. Patricia Williams answered her phone on the first ring. Her voice carried that mix of warmth and razor-sharp efficiency that had made her my go-to contact in business negotiations years ago. Only this time, I wasn't asking her to vet a partner or sniff out a competitor. This time, I wanted her to dig into my own flesh and blood. "I need everything on Michael and Jessica," I said. "Bank accounts, loans, credit cards, investments. If they've sneezed in the past year, I want to know who bought the tissues." Patricia chuckled softly, but her tone turned serious. "Give me 48 hours." She didn't need that long. The next evening, she appeared at my door with a slim leather folder. The look in her eyes told me the truth before she even spoke. "They're drowning," she said simply. I opened the file. The numbers screamed desperation. Their Westfield home had been refinanced 3 times. They were carrying not one but 2 mortgages, plus a maxed out line of credit. Credit card debt exceeded $80,000, spread across half a dozen banks. Michael's architectural firm was bleeding money, operating at a loss for 2 years. Jessica's boutique jewelry business? Nothing more than a hobby, running negative cash flow. "They're paying Peter with Paul's money," Patricia explained. "Juggling cards to cover minimums. Classic collapse pattern." I flipped another page and froze. "A life insurance policy. On me. $500,000. Patricia confirmed, tapping the paper. "Taken out 6 months ago. Jessica listed as beneficiary." Cold ran through me like ice water. "How is that even legal?" She claimed caregiver status. The insurer probably assumed Michael was the real beneficiary. But make no mistake, Jessica set this up intentionally. I stared at the neat columns of text, the tidy signatures, the seal of approval. Proof that while she smiled and hugged me at family dinners, Jessica had been planning my death in triplicate. "There's more," Patricia added. "Regular payments to a Dr. Richard Steinberg, geriatric psychiatrist. The timing lines up. Started 3 months ago. I didn't need her to finish. David had already warned me. Steinberg was known for being flexible, the kind of doctor who could make a competency evaluation lean whichever way the money pushed it." I closed the folder and set it on the table, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. "Thank you, Patricia. This is exactly what I needed." She hesitated. "Sarah, I've investigated corporate fraud, political corruption, even mafia skimming. But I'll tell you this, the ugliest files are always family." After she left, I sat in silence, the folder before me like a loaded weapon. Every debt, every lie, every policy, it all formed a single picture. Michael and Jessica weren't flailing in desperation. They were building a blueprint, a plan where my money became their lifeline. They thought they'd cornered me, but I wasn't trapped. Not yet. And now, I knew exactly what kind of war I was fighting. The knock came just after dawn, sharp and insistent. Through the security monitor, I saw Helen Peterson, Jessica's mother, standing on my porch, clutching a small purse like a lifeline. She looked pale, older than I remembered, but her eyes were clear. "Sarah, I need to talk to you," she said the moment I opened the door. I ushered her inside, poured tea, and waited. Her hands trembled as she set the cup down. "Jessica told me I had some kind of reaction to medication," she began. "But Sarah, I don't take any medications. Haven't for years, just vitamins." Her voice cracked, but determination pushed her forward. "I remember the champagne. It tasted bitter, metallic. And I remember seeing Jessica at the drinks table earlier, doing something with a small bottle. My pulse quickened. What kind of bottle? Like an eyedropper, Helen said. The kind you'd use for essential oils. Or poison. Her eyes filled with tears. Sarah, I think my daughter tried to kill you, and I almost died instead. For a long moment, the silence between us was heavy enough to crush bone. Then I spoke. Slowly. Deliberately. You're right. She did try to kill me. And I switched our glasses on purpose. The color drained from her face. She pressed a hand to her mouth, whispering, Dear God. We sat there in silence. Two women bound together, not by friendship, but by betrayal hers. By blood. Mine. By marriage. Finally, Helen straightened. What are you going to do? I looked at her, seeing not just a frightened mother, but a potential ally. Someone who had witnessed Jessica's sleight of hand. Someone who could confirm what I already knew. I'm going to give them exactly what they want, I said. Just not the way they expect to get it. Helen frowned. What does that mean? It means, I replied, my voice cool as steel. Your daughter and my son are about to learn that some games come with higher stakes than they ever imagined. I do. She nodded slowly, understanding more than my words revealed. If you need me to testify, I will. Jessica thinks she's clever, but she's not half as clever as she believes. When Helen left, I stood at the window, watching her cross the street. Her steps were unsteady, but her spine was straight. She had chosen a side, and it wasn't her daughter's. For the first time since that cursed party, I didn't feel alone. But I also knew this. If Jessica realized Helen had turned against her, she'd be ruthless. Which made my next move even more important. The snake thought she had cornered the mouse, but the mouse had just found a hunting partner. They arrived at 9 sharp, as if punctuality could disguise intent. Michael carried a leather briefcase. Jessica, a laptop bag. Both wore the kind of business casual armor people put on when they're preparing to close a deal. Only this deal was my life. Mom, Michael said, settling at the dining table. We brought the paperwork for Sunset Manor. If we move quickly, you can secure the best unit. Jessica opened her laptop, eyes glittering. It really is the perfect place, Sarah. Safe, comfortable, with people your own age. You'll never have to worry again. She slid a stack of documents toward me. Admission forms, financial disclosures, the dreaded power of attorney. The paper smelled of toner and desperation. I leafed through them slowly, pretending to read while watching their faces. Jessica's lips tightened each time I lingered too long. Michael drummed his fingers on the table, his nerves bleeding through the polished performance. This seems broad, I murmured, holding up the power of attorney. Immediate control over all accounts? Just a precaution, Michael said quickly. The facility requires it. Nothing unusual. I smiled faintly, setting the papers aside. I've already signed. Jessica's head snapped up. You have? I pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. David prepared everything yesterday. Notarized. Witnessed. You'll find it's all in order. Michael's hands shook as he took the documents. Relief flooded his face. So transparent it almost broke my heart. Almost. Jessica leaned in, scanning the first page, her expression flickering with triumph. And then the doorbell rang. Through the security monitor, I saw 2 officers. I opened the door calmly, letting them into the room. Detective Morrison. One introduced herself, flashing a badge. We need to ask some questions about a suspected poisoning at your residence. Jessica went rigid, color draining from her face. That was my mother. She had a reaction to medication. The doctor said it wasn't serious. Actually, Detective Morrison replied coolly, pulling a small notebook from her pocket. The hospital's toxicology report shows your mother ingested a concentrated dose of oleander extract. That's not medication. That's poison. Silence. Thick. Suffocating. The detective continued. We also tested the champagne bottle from your party. It contained the same poison. Someone deliberately doctored it. Her gaze fixed on Jessica. The glass with the highest concentration appeared to be intended for Mrs. Wilson here. Michael turned toward his wife, horror dawning in his eyes. Jess, what did you do? I didn't. Jessica's voice cracked. This is insane! Why would I poison my own mother? I leaned back in my chair, my smile thin, cold. Because it wasn't meant for her, Jessica. It was meant for me. I saw you slip the vial into my glass. I switched it. Jessica's breath hitched. Michael sagged back into his chair. Ashen. The officers stepped forward. Jessica Hartwell, you're under arrest for attempted murder. As they snapped handcuffs around her wrists, Jessica turned on me, eyes blazing. You think you've won? You have no idea what you've started. But she was wrong. I knew exactly what I had started. The front door slammed shut behind the detectives, their cruiser lights painting red and blue streaks across my living room walls. Jessica's shrill protests faded into the night, leaving behind a silence so heavy it pressed on my chest. Michael sat slumped on the sofa, his face buried in his hands. The unsigned copies of Sunset Manor paperwork scattered on the floor, like confetti from a funeral. She said it was just about keeping you safe, he whispered finally. His voice cracked, raw. She told me you were becoming forgetful, that you needed protection. She convinced me Sunset Manor was the answer. Why? See. End. See. I studied him. The boy I once rocked to sleep after nightmares, now a man unraveling under the weight of his own choices. And you believed her? Michael looked up, eyes bloodshot. We're drowning, Mom. The business is failing, the house payments. We're behind on everything. Jessica said if something happened to you naturally, we'd inherit enough to start over. I thought, his voice faltered. I thought we were just planning for the inevitable. I let his words hang in the air. The inevitable. How convenient. How cold. Michael, I said quietly. You knew she was planning something at that party. Maybe not the poison, but something. Don't lie to me. He flinched. His shoulders sagged in defeat. She said she'd staged something small. A break-in. Maybe. Something to scare you into moving. I didn't think. You didn't think. I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. You didn't think what terror feels like. You didn't think what it means for a son to stand by while his wife plots against his own mother. His hands shook as he held out his phone. Read them. The messages. You'll see. I scrolled. Jessica's words glared back at me. By Sunday, she'll beg us to take care of her. The sooner she's moved, the better. Don't worry, she won't resist after tomorrow night. Each line carved another wound, each emoji a nail in the coffin of my trust. I set the phone down gently. You knew. Maybe not the poison, but you knew enough. And you stayed silent. Michael's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Mom. I never wanted to hurt you. I stood, walking to my desk. From the drawer, I pulled a sealed envelope and dropped it onto the table before him. This is my updated will. I signed it yesterday. He blinked, confused. Your will? I met his gaze, unflinching. Yes. It leaves you a trust. $50,000 a year. Enough to live comfortably. Not extravagantly. Jessica gets nothing. The color drained from his face. 50 a year? That's all you'll ever see, I said coldly. And if you're convicted of conspiring in her scheme, even that disappears. Michael's hands trembled as he touched the envelope, as if it were a death sentence. Maybe it was, because in that moment, he realized what greed had cost him. Not just money, but me. 3 months later, the courthouse doors closed behind me with a finality that felt like steel bars slamming shut. Jessica had been sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder. Michael, my son, received 3 years for conspiracy, his lawyer bargaining down from a heavier charge by painting him as weak, manipulated, a man blinded by love and debt. I didn't attend Jessica's sentencing. I didn't need to see her cuffed hands or her venomous glare. The image of her slipping poison into my glass was already etched into my memory, but I was there for Michael. I watched from the gallery as the judge pronounced the words. His shoulders sagged. His eyes searched for me, for forgiveness. I gave him nothing. Back home, the house felt both emptier and freer. The cameras hummed quietly, their red lights blinking in the corners, like watchful guardians. On my desk lay the final version of my trust. Most of my fortune directed to cancer research and charities I believed in. Michael would receive his $50,000 a year, enough to survive, never enough to squander. Jessica, of course, would get nothing. Not a penny. And yet, life had not abandoned me. One evening my phone buzzed. Emma, my granddaughter, her voice trembling through the line. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what they were planning. I never would have." I cut her off softly. "I know, sweetheart. This isn't your burden to carry." Her voice steadied. "I got accepted into Northwestern. Pre-law. Just like you suggested." Tears pricked my eyes for the first time in months. "I'm proud of you, Emma. You'll choose better than they did." Badazoo. Badazoo. All. Badazoo. I, Emma. Emma. All. I. By. I. I. Helen Peterson had become an unlikely ally. Twice a week, she joined me for coffee, our conversations weaving between gardening tips and the cruelty of children who saw parents as stepping stones. She carried guilt, of course, but I reminded her it wasn't hers to bear. We were survivors, bound not by blood, but by betrayal. One afternoon, Helen said, "I keep thinking about how close they came to winning." I looked at the roses blooming in my garden, petals soft and resilient against the sun. "They never had a chance," I replied. "They underestimated me." Later, my lawyer David visited with final news. The insurance company had voided Jessica's policy, and Michael's creditors were seizing their house. "Would you like to make an offer?" he asked. I shook my head. "Let someone else have it. Someone who can afford it honestly." That night, I poured a glass of wine and stepped onto the deck. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the same colors as my roses. The air was calm, the house secure, the future mine again. I had started this story talking about a poisoned glass at my retirement party. But the truth is, this story was never about poison. It was about power. The power to defend my life, my freedom, and my dignity. I might be 70, but I was far from powerless. And the blinking red camera light beside me was the final symbol. A quiet reminder that I had seen the snakes in my garden, and I had cut off their fangs.